Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Egyptians take to the street again to protect the revolution from the new Mubarak. Rights group condemns Syria's continued use of cluster bombs. And new study reveals that the majority of disappeared persons in Kashmir are innocent. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
The Egyptian Attorney General filed a complaint with the court in which he called for a criminal trial for the Egyptian president. Egyptians headed to the square once again under the slogan, "The revolution has people to protect it." They chanted, calling for the downfall of the regime.
Thousands flooded Tahrir Square. They were not intimidated, despite the police tear-gassing them. Lawyers and journalists took off from the headquarters of their syndicates under the slogan, "The revolution has people to protect it." There was participation from the opposition, which is represented in civil society, political parties, and non-Islamist political movements that shaped the National Rescue Front. Large white signs with red writing were hung around the square. They said, "Down, down with the rule of the guide. The Muslim Brotherhood stole the revolution. Down with the constitutional declaration." And "The president is forcing the people into civil disobedience." Egyptians again repeated chants against President Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, but the chant, "The people want the downfall of the regime," once again dominated the situation. Morsi had met with members of the Supreme Judiciary in an attempt to defuse the crisis. After the meeting, Egyptian presidential spokesman Yasser Ali asserted that there were no amendments to the constitutional declaration that was issued by Morsi. The people then returned to the square to have a say and to reject Morsi's decision, in which he protected himself from judicial supervision. He also protected the Constituent Assembly to draft the Constitution and the Shura Council, which are both dominated by Islamists.
It is not his right to issue a constitutional declaration. He must know and understand that. All of the legal scholars in the country have said that it is not his right. It is not his right.
These were not Mohamed Morsi's decisions. These were the guide's decisions. The guide gives him orders and he follows them. The guide is ruling the country.
Clashes took place earlier between party factions and the police at Simon Bolivar Square, which is located near Tahrir Square and the American Embassy's headquarters. However, older activists sought to keep them away from that square and to convince them to maintain the peacefulness of the protests. In addition, Morsi's opponents have organized demonstrations in several governorates that coincide with the demonstrations in Tahrir. This comes at a time when the Muslim Brotherhood suddenly decided to cancel a demonstration it had called for in front of Cairo University, asserting that this decision was made to prevent bloodshed.
Last night, 253 Syrian refugees crossed into Jordan by land due to the escalation of violence in their country. The refugees were housed in al-Zatari camp, raising the number of Syrian refugees there to 45,216. Media spokesman for Syrian Refugee Affairs, Anmar Hamoud, said that 16 refugees who left the Zatari camp voluntarily have returned. Hamoud said that the camp's authorities have sponsored 123 Syrian refugees who met the Jordanian Interior Ministry's sponsorship requirements. He added the number of refugees who voluntarily left the camp and returned to Syria has reached 138. Human Rights Watch called on the Syrian regime to immediately stop using cluster bombs in its conflict with the Free Syrian Army. A joint NATO-Turkish force will begin conducting a site survey to assess the number of Patriot missiles to deploy along the Turkish-Syrian border.
Amid the November rain cloud persisting across the Syrian skies, regime planes continued to shower residents with fire and death. The northwestern parts of Syria were the scene of bombardment by regime planes, killing or injuring dozens of residents. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Syrian regime fighter jets targeted an olive press factory west of Idlib. The observatory noted that the city of Ma'arat al-Nu'man witnessed shelling from the air amid fierce clashes near the southern entrance of the city. The Free Syrian Army confirmed that Syrian fighter jets shelled the Bab al-Hawa border crossing with Turkey and that several of the injured were transported to Turkey for treatment. Fighter jets also shelled a Syrian refugee camp in the town of Atima near the Turkish border. 2 days after 11 children were killed by cluster bombs in an airstrike on the town of Deir es-Safir, south of Damascus, Human Rights Watch called on the Syrian government to immediately stop using these very dangerous and internationally banned weapons. And another related development, 3 days before the Japanese capital Tokyo is due to host a meeting for the Friends of Syria group, Japan expanded the number of Syrians subject to its sanctions, adding 36 individuals and 19 entities to the list.
Well, an independent report shows over 70% of those who disappeared in Indian-administered Kashmir over the past 2 decades were civilians. The report says the victims were either picked up by security forces or militants. Shahana Bhatt has more details for us.
A recent study on families of disappeared persons in Indian-administered Kashmir has thrown up some startling data. The study, which was conducted by the Kashmir chapter ActionAid International in association with Professor B.A. Dabla, says more than 72% of those who have disappeared over the period of 2-decade unrest were mostly civilians and their whereabouts are still unknown. The study, titled Disappeared Persons and Conditions of Their Families in Kashmir, encompassed over 700 cases. It also says that 99.84% of those who disappeared were young males and the sole breadwinners for their families. In the study, disappeared persons are described as those who were picked up by different security agencies on suspicion of being involved in anti-India activities, or at times by militants on suspicion of being police informers.
I think government and our religious clerics are silent and they have not responded to the situation. The government does not want to respond because it implicates them, because they are the sole player responsible for these crimes. And religious clerics, for some unknown reasons, we think that they have remained silent. They have not come to the rescue of these women because there is a fatwa that these women cannot remarry for 7 years.
Those who disappeared have left their wives and children, commonly known in Kashmir as half widows and half orphans. The existing legal system is unable to declare them as widows or orphans. Also, according to the Association of Disappeared Persons, there are over 8,000 to 10,000 disappeared people in Indian-controlled Kashmir. However, the government claims these men might have crossed over to Pakistan for arms training.
The independent studies carried out in Kashmir over the past 2 decades have revealed the presence of mass graves in Kashmir, which experts say likely have some connection with the disappeared persons.
The crimes against humanity are very, very disturbing. Not only the mass grave thing is there, the torture are there, but how there's a completely denial of the democratic rights of the people here.
The absence of head of the family has led to many problems into these families, as a result of which these families suffer many psychiatric ailments. Indian government does not deny the presence of mass graves, but say they can't investigate such a huge number and the families should recognize the graves. The study has also made a strong recommendation for improving the conditions of these families socially and economically, because they have no legal status and cannot claim rights as widows or inherent properties as orphans. Experts believe state and civil society have a role to play so as to save the future of these deprived families. Shahana Bhatt, Press TV, Indian-administered Kashmir.
An intelligence operation that was described as exceptional was carried out in coordination between the Ministry of Defense and the Interior Ministry and led to the arrest of 2 al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist cells.
The two groups have strongholds in South and North Baghdad and specialize in killing religious scholars and government employees, as well as visitors going to Karbala. They use silencers on their weapons.
Two terrorist groups were arrested through the full coordination of the intelligence directorates at the Ministries of Interior and Defense and the General Intelligence. The first was arrested in northern Baghdad and the other in the southern part.
This was necessary to put an end to these criminal groups that are killing Iraqi citizens. There is a detailed plan of action, and there is a daily, weekly and monthly plan that is studied and discussed at the highest level. So there was follow-up and leads to two crimes in northern and southern Baghdad.
The first group is centered in the area of Sulair, in the northern part of the capital. It worked on eliminating religious figures and government employees. They used weapons with silencers under the direction of a group of terrorists affiliated with al-Qaeda.
The traffic officer was standing under the overpass near the High Tunis neighborhood. We received information through Omar Majid, who received it from Ahmed Hantouche.
We headed toward Gamay al-Munzar Street, where he handed us a pistol, and he told us, "You see this officer? When he comes, open fire at him." I fired 4 rounds. He was hit in the chest, and he fell to the ground, so he fled the scene.
استهداف الزائرين جنوبي العاصمة خلال المناسبات الدينية كان هدف المجموعة الثانية.
Targeting visitors in the southern part of the capital during religious occasions was the target of the second group, which also executed other organized operations, such as renting expensive cars and luring drivers inside the house by asking for help, then killing them with weapons with silencers and burying them in the backyard of the house. According to officials, deciding to move against the targets and collecting the largest amount of intelligence information was in the forefront of the contributing factors that made the preemptive operation successful. However, other terrorist and criminal cells remain. From in front of the headquarters of the Ministry of Defense in Baghdad, Ala Al-Khafeji, Iraqiya.
The late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was reburied in the city of Ramallah after samples were taken from his remains for testing to find out if he was poisoned with polonium. It's expected the samples will be examined for many months before it's determined if Arafat, who died in 2004, was poisoned. French authorities had opened an investigation into Arafat's death in response to a request by his widow, Suha Arafat.
أغلق ضريح الرئيس الفلسطيني الراحل ياسر عرفات في رام الله بعدما تم أخذ عينات.
The late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's tomb was closed in Ramallah after samples were taken from his remains for testing in an attempt to solve the mystery of his death over 8 years ago. Russian, French, and Swiss experts gathered required samples from the body without removing it from its place, with the approval and consensus of all the experts. The procedure was attended by 3 French judges tasked with investigating the possible murder after Suha Arafat, the widow of the late leader, submitted a complaint in France. International experts will try to know if Arafat was poisoned with a radioactive polonium substance. The hypothesis was put forward again after a satellite channel broadcast a documentary in August, revealing that Lausanne's Institute of Radiation Physics found an abnormal amount of polonium in Arafat's personal belongings. Tawfiq Tarawi, the head of the Palestinian Investigation Committee, confirmed in a press conference that the committee has the data and evidence that prove that President Arafat was assassinated by Israel.
الرئيس عرفات اغتيل من قبل إسرائيل.
قرائن والبينات اللي موجودة عندنا وكذلك القناعات أن إسرائيل.
The data and the evidence that we have, as well as our convictions, point to Israel committing this act, so we need conclusive proof. All of the investigations aim to find this proof so that we can take the culprits to the International Criminal Court.
هو وراء هذا الاغتيال إلى محكمة الجنايات الدولية.
The Palestinian people's feelings were a mix of sadness and anger, and a determination to find out the truth of the departure of their historic leader.
He is a symbol because Abu Ammar represents the entire Palestinian cause and all the Palestinian people. He is a symbol of the entire Arab nation. Everyone responsible for the assassination of President Abu Ammar must be held accountable.
The hospitals in France must check these tests to find out if Abu Ammar was martyred by poison or not. But for them to dig up Abu Ammar's body is unacceptable. Dead or alive, Abu Ammar is a red line. We won't allow anyone to cross that line.
Look, I love the man, and I really believed in him.
Look, I love the man, and I really believe he is the man who embodied the aspirations of the entire Palestinian people to regain their rights and freedoms and land and independence. He is an influential figure, only comparable to someone like Gandhi, and Nehru later, or someone like Mandela.
Somebody like Gandhi and Nehru later, or somebody like Mandela.
توفي عرفات عن عمر يناهز 75 عاما في 11 من تشرين الثاني نوفمبر عام 2004.
Arafat passed away when he was around 75 years old on November 11, 2004 in a military hospital in Paris. He was moved there with the consent of the Israelis who had been besieging Arafat for over 2 years in his compound, the Muqata. No clear medical information was released explaining the cause of death. A large number of Palestinians accuse Israel of poisoning Arafat. Israel denies the claim. Some believe there was a Palestinian complicity in light of the internal struggle over the leadership. Yola Zaharaldin, BBC.
And 2 days before Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas presents a proposal to the UN General Assembly for a vote on a Palestinian non-member statehood, Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza Strip are publicly backing the bid. The vote would implicitly recognize Palestinian statehood and could also grant access to bodies such as the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where the Palestinians could file complaints. Here's more with Zainab Sufa.
After their bid for full UN membership was thwarted by U.S. opposition last year, Palestinians launched a bid for recognition as a non-member state. The vote, however, could still secure the Palestinians a greater international recognition. Residents across the West Bank and Gaza are publicly backing the Palestinian president's bid. In Gaza, dozens gathered in support of Abbas's bid.
We pray God that President Abu Mazen succeeds in securing a Palestinian state on the 1967 border with Jerusalem as its capital, a non-member state in the United Nations.
In Jerusalem, Palestinian representatives of religious and political factions also showed their support for President Mahmoud Abbas.
The Hamas movement is with all the diplomacy acts that adds to the Palestinian victories. We welcome the step for statehood at United Nations, but we want it to be through a national program based on the resistance and keeps the Palestinian rights.
Israeli and American objections to the bid, which is believed to be headed for a sure victory in the 193-country body, center around Palestinian admission to the International Criminal Court, where they could file complaints against Israel. The United Kingdom, which in recent weeks had championed an effort among European countries to abstain on the statehood vote, has requested that Palestinians forego an application to the ICC in exchange for changing their vote into a yes. Palestinian officials have refused, but say the timing and strategy of ICC accession is a matter for later internal discussions. France, meanwhile, said it would vote in favor of the Palestinian bid.
You know that for years and years the constant position of France has been to recognize the Palestinian state. That held true in 1982 with the speech that François Mitterrand made to the Knesset. That has held true last year when France voted in favor of recognizing Palestine at UNESCO. And it's true. You reminded us, sir, during the presidential campaign, because François Hollande, as a candidate in his promise number 59, committed himself in that direction. So that is why I'm answering you directly. Next Thursday or Friday, when the question is put before us, France will answer yes out of a desire for coherence.
If the vote passes on Thursday, It would be the same date when the United Nations voted on a statehood for Israel more than 6 decades ago. Zain Abu Sufa for the News at 10.
We open with politics and the news that everyone was waiting for. Former Kadima chairwoman Tzipi Livni announced today that she is running for the 19th Knesset at the helm of a new party. Meanwhile, results from the Likud Knesset primary are in, and the winners are, well, here to tell us is IBA's political reporter, Eli Wagalanter. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Yochanan. First, to Tzipi Livni, no surprise in today's announcement. She's been hinting at making a Knesset run for weeks. Nevertheless, the ripple effect of another center-left party in the race is likely to further divide opponents to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The new party is called the Movement, headed by Tzipi Livni. That's the official name. In Hebrew, Hatnuah B'Reshut Tzipi Livni, which may be the first Israeli political party named after the leading candidate. Livni said at her news conference that the movement is the only ideological alternative in the upcoming elections to Netanyahu's government.
Yes, my decision is to go back to politics and to form another party that would be the alternative for this government, for the Likud and hopefully for Netanyahu, because I believe that Israel is going the wrong way and we need to change the policy of this government in order to change the trends that Israel is facing.
Livni did not present her candidates list today and has until December 6th to do so. Today's announcement was delayed for weeks amid speculation that Livni would run with an existing party or try to form a bloc of parties on the center-left. Livni pressured Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid in recent days to combine their lists, but he turned her down. And Labor leader Sheli Yachimovich pleaded with Livni on Monday night not to form another fragment of a party that will further divide the left. And that very well could happen. According to the latest poll this morning, Livni's party would win 9 seats, Labor drops to 20 seats, and Lapid's Yesh Atid wins only 5 seats. Meanwhile, the incumbent Likud party is heading towards election with a new right-leaning lineup. Results from the two-day primary shows a marked shift within Likud, with the party's list for the next Knesset including MKs considered part of the right-wing faction of the party. The big winners were MKs Danny Danon, Yariv Levin, and Tzipi Chotovely, who all made it to the top 10 spots on the list. But the biggest news was Moshe Feiglin, head of the Jewish leadership faction within the Likud and considered an extreme right-wing member of the party. He captured the 14th spot on the list and should easily enter the Knesset for the first time in his political career. Here you have the list of candidates within the party before a combined list is formed with Yisrael Beitenu. Likud leader Netanyahu will be followed on the list by the same up-and-coming young politicians who were second and third on the Likud list last time: Education Minister Gideon Sa'ar, Environmental Protection Minister Gilad Erdan.
تتميز السينما الإيرانية بإنتاج أفلام ذات طابع ومضمون. Iranian cinema distinguishes itself with the production of films inspired by religion or containing religious themes through state funding, despite the objection of Muslims in many countries. However, the production of films and their performance have recently decreased, but they are still popular in Iran and abroad.
موشحة بالحجاب.
With a headscarf and an Islamic stamp on the screen is how Iranian cinema started in the Islamic Republic. Iran produces over 100 films annually. Most are financially supported by the government, which censors scripts before filming starts. Iranian cinema has faced many challenges and difficulties, but its determination led it to overcome some of them and become a main player on the international scene.
We can say that Iranian cinema is among the top 10 in the world. It tries to promote the Islamic identity, and it proved its presence internationally. We don't impose any restrictions on it, but we have regulations, so the features of our society are taken into consideration.
Some directors occasionally disregard these so-called regulations. As a result, the movie industry's production and performance pays the price. Even the sanctions imposed on Iran have impacted movie production. Politics are also to blame.
Iranian cinema is very weak today and has clearly declined. The mindset of the officials is to blame. When politics can impose anything on the film industry, then we move away from creativity and the audience.
Iranian women are present on the movie screen. They fought hard but imposed their presence on the industry and gained international awards. The latest was an Oscar for the film The Separation of Nader from Simin. However, the reality of Iranian cinema doesn't seem acceptable for the ambitions of women.
Women have a great presence in Iranian films, but the problem is the mode of thinking. A film will not face any problems if it follows the regulations, but if it is produced with complete freedom, then it will be negatively impacted.
Many push the so-called seventh art to maintain the popularity of the Iranian film industry inside and outside the country by directing, producing, and acting. They aspire to a future liberated from political restrictions. Iranian cinema seeks to be out of the ordinary, but it hits the wall of politics. Officials call it regulations, but critics respond that these regulations hinder the development of films. This reality pushes Iranian cinema to face many challenges to maintain its place locally and grow its status internationally. Abdelhadi Taher, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.